David.
The Federal Reserve was created on December 23, 1913, with the enactment of the Federal Reserve Act. First off, it should be clearly understood that the Federal Reserve is not a branch of the government. It is not even controlled by the government. It is a privately owned company made up primarily of foreigners who are some of the most powerful people on the planet. Many of these Fed shareholders run some of the largest banks and financial institutions in the world. The Federal Reserve is comprised of three entities. The Board of Governors, which is a completely independent agency outside of the government who oversees the entire Federal Reserve as a whole. The 12 Federal Reserve Banks, which operate the Federal Reserve System, which regulate and oversee the privately owned commercial banks and are supervised by the Board of Governors. There is the Federal Open Market Committee, which consists of 12 members, 7 from the Board of Governors and 5 from the Reserve Bank presidents, who together decide monetary policy for the country. Notice that there are no government agencies or authorities anywhere in this system. The Fed will say that they exist because of an act of Congress, but it should be understood how the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 came about.
This is Jekyll Island, where in 1910, representatives from the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Morgans, and other private bankers gathered secretly to draft the legislation that would create the Federal Reserve. Ed Griffin literally wrote the book on what happened at Jekyll Island.
Central banks are banking cartels which have gone into partnership with the respective governments in the countries where they operate. And they've been given monopolistic power over the creation of the nation's money supply. That's what the politicians handed to them as a gift, you might say, for the partnership. Now, in return, what did the bankers do for the politicians? They promised to create money out of nothing, now that they've got this legal power to do it anytime the government needs it.
This act, which established the Federal Reserve as the central bank of the United States, was originally designed to have a renewable charter every 20 years, but due to the passing of the McFadden Act in 1927, Congress rechartered the Federal Reserve banks into perpetuity. And so there is currently no expiration date or repeal date for the Federal Reserve. The President does appoint the 7 members of the Board of Governors, also known as the Federal Reserve Board. However, the Fed's monetary policy decisions do not have to be approved by the President or anyone else in the executive or legislative branches of government.
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
It does not receive funding appropriated by Congress, and the terms of the members of the Board of Governors span multiple presidential and congressional terms. The current chairman of the Board of Governors is Jerome Powell. He was appointed in February of 2018, and his term as the chairman will expire in 2022. He became a governor in 2012, and his term, which was renewed, will not expire until 2028. I guess these governors can basically be reappointed indefinitely. Currently, 3 Board of Governor positions are vacant. The 12 Federal Reserve banks are located in the cities of Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Richmond, Atlanta, Chicago, St. Louis, Minneapolis, Kansas City, Dallas, and San Francisco. The Fed might claim that commercial banks own the Federal Reserve, but according to the political science professor Michael D. Reagan, the ownership of the reserve banks by the commercial banks is symbolic. They do not exercise the proprietary controls associated with the concept of ownership, nor share beyond the statutory dividend in reserve bank profits. So, who does own the Fed? Well, the stockholders do. The Federal Reserve pays dividends to its stockholders in the tune of a fixed 6% of claimed annual profits. Okay, so who are these shareholders? The Fed began with approximately 300 people or banks that became owners or stockholders purchasing stock at $100 per share in the Federal Reserve banking system. And it should be noted that none of these stocks were publicly traded. The Rothschilds and the Bank of England were instrumental in the creation of the Federal Reserve banking system in the U.S. They accomplished this through their control of stock holdings in major U.S. banks and having powerful subsidiary firms in New York. The two principal representatives in New York are J.P. Morgan Company and Kuhn, Loeb & Company, which were the firms that set up the Jekyll Island Conference where the Federal Reserve Act was drafted, and it was these firms that directed the successful campaigns to have the plan enacted into law by Congress in 1914. They were also sure to purchase the controlling amounts of stock in the Federal Reserve Bank in New York and had their principal officers appointed to the Federal Board of Governors and the Federal Advisory Council. They then continued to use their power and influence to purchase controlling shares in all the Federal Reserve regional banks as well. So there is a traceable linear connection between the Rothschilds, Bank of England, and the controlling shareholders for the entire U.S. Federal Reserve banking system today. Here is a list of the major families and firms who currently control the U.S. Federal Reserve. Did you think the Federal Reserve was a government institution? What are your thoughts about having a private corporation owned by foreigners which controls the printing of money for the government and then charges the same government interest on that printed money that is in turn paid back to the corporation using the taxes collected from the citizens? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you to all who support this channel, especially to those who take the time to like and comment. I don't monetize my channel, so your likes and comments are greatly appreciated. If you're not yet a subscriber, hit the subscribe button, then select the notification bell to be notified as soon as I post up new content. Visit my website at www.silvertorch66.com.